Appreciate it. Want to talk more about this with Naveen Nayak, President and Executive Director of the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and Democratic strategist and consultant Fred Hicks as well. Naveen, I want to start things off with you, if I can, right? You're looking at the jobs numbers. I'm doing fairly well, right? Inflation seems to be coming down because of what Fed Chair Jerome Powell has been doing with interest rates. Even wage growth coming in line almost with where we are with inflation. All of that being said, right, it's still not resonating with the American people. Why do you think that is?
I mean, I think there's two different things here. One is people's perception of the economy, which unfortunately has become very partisan. We live in an era where no matter how good the economy is, as you noted, a 50-year low for unemployment, Republicans are still going to have a negative view. I think the data point I'm really encouraged by and watching is what do people say about their personal financial situation? And there's a Quinnipiac poll recently that showed that 60% of Americans say their personal financial situation is good or very good. And so I think there is a lag between how people see the economy sort of in the abstract versus what's going on in their lives. And I think that's going to be the real measure of how people start to feel over time.
Fred, I want to talk to you about some of the polling numbers that we've been seeing. I'm sure you're seeing the same numbers that we have been seeing, right? If you have a general election matchup, first of all, the former president and President Biden are in a dead heat, 46-46. And then there is how they are seen, the list that we just saw up on our screens. Which phrase describes the candidate well? A record of White House accomplishments, Trump is up. Mentally up for the job, Trump. Has vision for the future, Trump. Cares about people like you, Trump. Is honest, Biden. A likable person, Biden. Too old to run for president, Biden. Unpack this, if you will, for us. And what, Fred, stands out to you in this?
Well, first of all, people always have a glorified view of someone who used to be in office versus the person who's in office. So in other words, people's poll numbers go up once they leave office. So that's not surprising that people would see that and feel that way. The other thing is that we got to remember, America is pretty much a 48, 49 countries. So you're only talking about maybe 2 to 3% of the electorate that's up for grabs. So it's not surprising to see that either. I would be surprised if the numbers are very different. Now, the thing that's really important, I think, to Democrats and to the administration is that a likability and the honesty issue. And when we think about the number of indictments that Donald Trump is facing, if he's the nominee, that honesty and that likability will become a huge factor. And at the end of the day, if people feel good personally about where things are and they trust their leader and they feel that leader is honest, then they're going to go in that direction. So even though as a Democrat, I love to see bigger and better numbers, this pretty much reflects where America is. And I think if these numbers hold and this trajectory holds, that the administration will be fine.
I'm glad you brought up the indictments, Fred, because, Naveen, I want to read for you a quote from The Atlantic saying this. All signs suggest that Biden and Trump would begin a prospective rematch considerably diminished from their first encounter, like boxers re-entering the ring long after their prime. In a second Biden-Trump bout, the result may turn less on which candidate is stronger than on whose weaknesses are unacceptable to more voters in the states that will decide the outcome. As Kelly just mentioned, right, we have now begun to see inklings of the current president going after his predecessor, naming him as a predecessor, especially when it comes to the economy. We have yet to hear him go after him when it comes to these indictments and the looming trials that are in his future. Is it time for President Biden to double down on this, considering this analysis from The Atlantic?
I mean, I think a few things on that, Yasmin, which are really important. First of all, the election is still more than a year away. I think there's no question that we are going to have plenty of conversation in this country about Donald Trump's criminality, about his efforts to overturn a free and fair election. So I'm not anxious about the fact that we're not talking about that. I think that will be a point of the conversation. The other point you mentioned, though, is that Atlantic piece suggests that both candidates go into this diminished. And that part I find discouraging because since the last election, one candidate, likely frontrunner in the Republican Party, tried to overturn an election, lead a violent insurrection, put in a court in place that stripped away a fundamental right for women in this country. And all of that has happened. Yet the other president, the other nominee, has actually led us out from a pandemic, The U.S. economy is stronger than any other economy in the world right now, thanks to Joe Biden's leadership. And so I actually think part of this is a problem on the Democratic side, where you do see these low enthusiasm numbers. You do see Democrats feeling, not as excited. And I think that's a problem on our side that we really have to fix.
So what, their messaging?
Well, I think I'll be honest, I think there's an element of ageism that's going on here where because of the president's age, which seems to occupy a lot of the conversation and people, understandably wanting maybe a fresh face, we're overlooking the actual performance of this president, right? For 2.5 years, he has shown in every facet, whether it's international relations and sort of organizing an entire European continent in defense of Europe and their aggression in Russia, whether it's getting us out of the pandemic, standing up our economy, bringing back manufacturing, addressing gun violence, showing empathy. I think we should be ourselves a lot more kind of excited and heartened by the leader that Joe Biden has been for this country for the last 2.5 years. And I think as more Democrats come home, you see this in a lot of the polling, part of that softness is in Democrats not being as confident right now. And I think that, that gives me hope that Democrats will sort of come home in waves.
I saw you shaking your head there in agreement, Fred, and I do want you to weigh in on that. But before you do, I want to play for you some sound that I thought was pretty interesting on Meet the Press yesterday with my colleague Chuck Todd, with Franklin Foer, asked about the president, who said something I think really interesting for folks. And I want you to hear what he had to say about the president, and then we'll talk.
If at the end of this calendar year, Joe Biden announces that he's not going to seek a second term, based on all your reporting, how much of a surprise will that be to you?
I would say it would be a surprise to me, but it wouldn't be a total surprise.
Wouldn't be a total shock.
It wouldn't be a total shock.
Why is that?
When he talks about his life, he uses this word fate constantly. And Joe Biden is a very religious guy, and fate is a word loaded with religious meaning. And he always talks about he can't say where fate goes. And so I always, when I hear that, to me, it's the ellipses in the sentence when he's talking about his own future that I account for in thinking about his calculus.
I wonder, Fred, as we're talking about this, right, and you think about what Naveen just said, talking about kind of this element of ageism in this conversation that he thinks is actually going on, how that plays into what we just heard there from Franklin.
Yeah. So first, I fully expect that the president will run for re-election. And certainly if he waited until the end of the year, that would make it problematic or difficult for anyone else to get on the ballots, right? It takes time. We know that. And I agree. I think there's an element of ageism that's at play here. And I think that's starting to wear on President Biden. This is a job he's wanted for 40 plus years. He finally has it, and he's thrown himself completely into it. Listen, I'm here in Georgia on the ground where everything is happening with the Fulton County indictments and really the source of everything that happened that led up to January 6th. And I want to put some concrete numbers here. This is Labor Day, so let's talk about this. Yeah. Here in Georgia, because of the Biden-Harris administration, in the clean energy space, you have over 15,000 jobs in community of colors that are coming online with the two new Hyundai and Rivian plants that are coming on board here. They represent about $17 billion in jobs and revenue for the state of Georgia. That is a direct result of the Biden-Harris administration. And then when you talk about the investments from the film industry and the SAG and the IAFSTRA unions, you're talking about thousands of jobs that have come here and are influencing the outcome of the elections here in Georgia. So when we think about the 1,179 or so vote margin for 2020, given the work that the administration has done, and given the investments in clean energy and the jobs and the labor jobs that they've brought here, I fully think that they have the ability to grow that margin next year if they can talk about that. And if Democrats, if we can get out of our own way, and as you just mentioned, stop thinking so much about how old President Biden is and look at the actual record. Their record and their list of accomplishments between President Biden, Senator Ossoff, Senator Warnock for Georgia, which both parties agree is a critical state in the 2024 elections. Their work here has been amazing, and we really need to talk about it because, we look at those poll numbers, we see the numbers are actually worse right now in Georgia, the gap between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, but that's largely because Democrats have not come home. And this Labor Day, I think, is a great time for the administration, the campaign, to really start honing in on the actual impact. And the other stuff, listen, The trials are going to take place at some point between the primary and the November election. So, no, I don't think the administration needs to talk about that, but they can talk about this. And I think President Biden just needs to continue giving his energy that he's giving on the trail, and Democrats will eventually come home.
Fred Hicks, thank you. Naveen Nayak, thank you for displaying what looks like to be your children's artwork behind you. You got to love that. Happy Labor Day to you both. Appreciate it.